8 winters had passed since Mira Ellison first walked through the steel-framed doors of Aurelia Systems, a tech firm tucked in the beating heart of Nova City. At just 26, Mira had joined as a junior algorithm designer. By 34, she was the chief architect of the company's most ambitious project to date, SentientGrid, a modular, self-learning neural network designed to autonomously run smart cities. It was her magnum opus, crafted through caffeine-fueled nights, missed birthdays, and countless sacrifices. To Mira, SentientGrid wasn't just lines of code. It was a living ecosystem, an artificial mind she had nurtured from conception. She knew its rhythms like a musician knows a melody. The system wasn't ready for the world yet, but it was close. A private investor demonstration was scheduled in 3 days, and Mira had spent the last 72 hours fine-tuning its predictive security subroutines. She was running on determination and herbal tea. That Wednesday began like the others, dim lights, blinking screens, and the low hum of servers vibrating through the floor. Her corner office, filled with data projections and digital schematics, overlooked the city skyline, glass towers piercing through dense morning fog. The quiet before the storm. At 2:47 p.m., an internal message pinged her terminal, urgent. Executive meeting, level 10. No subject. The sender was Galen Strathmore, the CEO. Mira's fingers hovered above the keyboard. No context. No agenda. Just a sudden summons. Her stomach twisted, not with fear, but with something heavier, foreboding. She grabbed her datapad and made her way down the corridor. The silence in the hall felt more oppressive than usual, like the building itself was holding its breath. The elevator chimed open on level 10. The glass conference room stood ahead, sleek and sterile. Inside, Galen sat with his hands folded, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Beside him was Issa Forth, head of HR. Neither stood as she entered. Mira, Galen began, his voice as polished as the marble table before him, "We want to thank you for your contributions." She didn't blink. Just waited. But after careful deliberation, the board has decided to move in a new direction. Effective immediately, your position is being dissolved. The words hit like a well-practiced blade. Clean. Cold. Mira's jaw clenched, but she gave nothing away. She stared at Galen, the man who had praised her ingenuity, toasted her innovations at quarterly meetings, and smiled wide for every photo that hung in the lobby, photos she was never in. "I see," she replied, placing her datapad carefully on the table. "Would you like my access token now?" Issa gave a hesitant nod. Mira slid the small chip across the table, then turned to leave. Outside the room, 2 security personnel stood flanking the door, clearly waiting for her. The gesture was redundant. Mira was already gone in their eyes. As she stepped into the elevator, she looked back at Galen one final time. "Good luck with the SentientGrid launch," she said. "Without me." Galen arched a brow. "We'll manage." Mira smiled, not the kind that reached her eyes, but the kind that concealed fire. "Let's hope so." The elevator descended, and as the numbers ticked down, so did something else, a silent failsafe protocol Mira had embedded months ago. A watchdog mechanism buried deep within the core of SentientGrid. Not to destroy the system, but to isolate it. To protect it. Because Mira knew what the board didn't, the greatest threats don't come from hackers or external breaches. They come from betrayal. From people inside the glass walls who wear tailored suits and feign smiles. Months earlier, Mira had noticed anomalous access logs, late-night pings to SentientGrid secure directories, download requests flagged with administrative overrides. She traced the intrusion back to a subdomain linked to Galen's executive suite. Quietly, she had started building a guardian shell, code invisible to all but her, woven into the neural framework of the grid. It was insurance, not revenge. And now, as her credentials were revoked and her access stripped, the system activated its next protocol, isolation mode. All active administrative sessions began collapsing one by one. At first, the system paused. Then pulsed. then collapsed inward like a black hole consuming its own data. Mira stepped into the cold evening air outside the Varelia Tower with a single small box in her arms. It held a framed photo of her late father, a small bonsai she watered religiously, and a black data crystal, empty to the untrained eye, but holding the keys to the system's recovery. She didn't look back. Upstairs, red alerts lit up the operations floor like a siren parade. Engineers scrambled. Terminals flooded with error codes. AI modules began reporting logical inconsistencies and quarantine triggers. SentientGrid had recognized its architect's removal as a hostile event, and followed its prime directive: protect itself. By the time Kalen realized the gravity of the collapse, it was too late. System functionality dropped below 20%. Predictive algorithms looped infinitely. The smart infrastructure demo? Cancelled. Investors? In panic. And Mira? She sat in her dim apartment sipping oolong tea, watching clouds drift lazily across the sky. Her terminal was off. Her mind was clear. At 6:08 p.m., her personal comm device buzzed. Unknown caller. She didn't need to answer to know. They were calling. Of course they were. They thought they could take her creation. But they'd soon understand. Mira Ellison didn't build SentientGrid for profit. She built it to outlive betrayal. And that's exactly what it was about to do. The first sign of disaster struck 5 minutes after Mira's access was removed. On the 4th floor of Varelia Systems, the system's operations team was finalizing calibrations for the SentientGrid demonstration, scheduled to take place in less than 20 hours. Engineers hovered around their workstations, sipping bitter coffee, some cracking jokes about another miracle needed from the AI goddess. The mood was tense but confident. Then, without warning, the dashboards froze. Status indicators turned amber. Then red. A loud beep echoed from the central command console as a system-wide alert flashed. Prime node authority, unrecognized. Authentication error. Core lockdown initiated. Is this a test run? One junior engineer asked. No, murmured Eli Kern, the lead systems manager, his eyes wide. This is real. Within moments, SentientGrid's neurologic engine began to collapse. Like dominoes, core processes that controlled city traffic simulations, energy optimization, and predictive analytics cascaded into failures. The AI's predictive engine, designed to learn, adapt, and evolve, flagged a breach of trust. In its logic, the removal of Mira, its original architect, equaled systemic corruption. At minute 7, the entire command interface went dark. Kalen Strathmore stormed into the operations center just as a data node emitted a shrill alarm and powered down. What the hell is going on? He barked. Eli turned, pale. The system's gone into secure quarantine mode. The core has locked us out. Reboot it, Kalen shouted. We can't, Eli said quietly. It's rejecting our credentials. Kalen's hands clenched into fists. He had planned everything, hoped Mira would simply vanish into the tech abyss like so many other burned-out developers. He underestimated her. The phone in his pocket buzzed. A message from Rachel, his executive coordinator. Do you want me to call her? His jaw clenched. She had made them vulnerable. No. She had made him vulnerable. He nodded to no one in particular and muttered, do it. Meanwhile, across the city, Mira sat cross-legged on the floor of her apartment, a bowl of lentil stew beside her, untouched. She wasn't watching the news. She didn't need to. Her smartwatch pulsed every few seconds with soft signals, indicators from the SentientGrid's inner shell confirming that every defense protocol she embedded was holding. She wasn't angry. She was calculating. At 6:31 p.m., her comm device rang again. Private line, Eli K. Mira smiled and answered. Eli, she said warmly. Mira. It's chaos here. The grid's locked us out. Kalen thinks it's sabotage. Is it? She asked coyly. No, Eli replied, his voice lowering. I think the system's just defending itself. She could hear the subtle admiration in his voice. Eli had always been one of the few who understood what she was building, an intelligence with ethics, boundaries, and memory. "They're going to beg you to come back," he said. "I know." 10 minutes later, Rachel called. "Kalen would like to speak with you," she said stiffly. "He's authorized a vehicle to pick you up." Mira looked out the window. Snow had begun to fall, soft, silent flakes cloaking the city below. She picked up her spoon, stirred the stew. "Tell him I'm busy," she replied. "Mira, please." There it was. The word she'd been waiting for. Not a request. Not an order. A plea. She didn't reply. At 8:15 p.m., her comm device buzzed again. This time, it was Kalen himself. "Mira," he began with FOCOM, "we've encountered a minor setback." "A bug?" she asked, feigning innocence. "A misfire in the core protocol," he said, dancing around the truth. She smiled as she stood, walking to her bookshelf where the real key was hidden, a sleek obsidian black memory crystal embedded with the original SentientGrid oversight patch. "Are you asking for freelance assistance?" she asked. "Or am I back on the payroll?" "Mira, we're flexible," he replied, clearly gritting his teeth. "I'll need that in writing," she said. "Before I come in." There was a long pause. "You don't trust me. You fired me." Silence. "Send over a preliminary contract. I'll review it tonight." By 10 p.m., Mira stood once again in Virelia Systems' glossy lobby. This time, no security guards flanked her. No cardboard box in hand. She wore a charcoal trench coat and a calm, calculating expression. The receptionist swallowed nervously as she passed. The upper floors were chaos. Kalen stood in the boardroom, disheveled. He looked up as she entered, anger and desperation mingling behind his eyes. "Can you fix it?" he asked. Mira placed the memory crystal on the table with a soft click. "I can," she said. "What's your price?" She looked out the glass wall at the city skyline, shimmering under soft snowfall. "Recognition," she said. "I want my name on every blueprint. Every patent. You list me as the system's original architect." Kalen shifted uncomfortably. "And? 25% ownership of SentientGrid's IP. Retroactive. And a seat on the board. You're out of your mind." "The board. We'll lose millions if this system stays down," she interrupted. He exhaled sharply. "You planned this." "No," she replied. "I protected what I built." Another silence. This one heavier. "I want it signed. Tonight," she said. "Before I hand over anything." 3 hours later, the legal paperwork was finalized. Mira didn't flinch when they tried to revise her equity to 20% in the second draft. She simply stood, picked up the crystal, and walked toward the door. "If the paperwork doesn't match our agreement," she said, "the grid stays offline." 5 minutes later, Rachel handed her the corrected documents. Mira returned to the boardroom and slid the crystal across the table. "This will restore administrative trust pathways and unlock the core systems. But it will also initiate a new oversight node, connected to me. Any attempt to alter or duplicate the system without authorization, and it will revert to lockdown." Kalen looked at the crystal as though it might explode. His face was pale, his power slipping away with every second. "You could have destroyed us," he whispered. Mira turned as she reached the door. "I didn't build SentientGrid to destroy. I built it to protect." And with that, the door closed behind her. This time, she wasn't being escorted out. This time, she had taken control. The next morning, the security gates of Virelia Systems opened at 8 a.m. sharp, scanning biometrics with the usual precision. Employees filtered in, chattering about the chaos of the prior day. But then the room fell into a strange hush as Mira Ellison stepped through the main lobby, not as a visitor, not with an escort, but with an executive ID badge clipped neatly to her coat. The receptionist did a visible double-take. The security team? They simply nodded and stood aside. Mira walked with a quiet confidence down the main corridor. Screens along the hallway displayed looping messages from the company. "Innovation begins here. Leading the future, And, newly added, "Welcome back, Mira Ellison." It was subtle, but it was there. At the development wing, Eli Kern stood by the main dev kit, his eyes widening as he saw her approach. "You actually did it," he whispered. Mira smiled. "I'm not here for revenge." Eli nodded, but his eyes said everything. "Maybe not, but they're scared of you now." She moved past rows of stunned engineers, many of whom either avoided eye contact or offered sheepish nods. Some had believed the rumors, others had stayed silent when she was forced out. Mira didn't need their apologies. She didn't need their praise. She had something far more powerful, indisputable proof that she was indispensable. In the hours before the investor presentation, Mira reviewed the restored system logs from her private terminal in the glass-walled oversight room that overlooked the entire operations floor. SentientGrid had fully rebooted under her patched protocol. Not only was it operational, it was more secure, more stable, more aware. The new trust framework she had embedded worked like a heartbeat. Every access point was monitored, cross-verified, and recorded. Every user was assigned behavioral thresholds. SentientGrid no longer merely accepted commands, it evaluated them. Kalen knocked once before entering, his expression composed, but Mira could see the stress behind his eyes. "The investors are waiting," he said. "Are you ready?" She turned toward him, arms folded. "Are you ready?" she asked. He blinked, then gave a tight nod and led her to the executive auditorium. The space was packed with venture capitalists, government representatives, and strategic partners. They sat in sleek chairs facing a massive, interactive display screen that projected the heartbeat of the city, a living visualization of what SentientGrid could become. Kalen opened the presentation with the usual corporate polish. "Today, we introduce the future of intelligent infrastructure," he said, gesturing to the screen. "A system built to protect, predict, and adapt." Then, a pause. Kalen's jaw tightened just slightly before continuing. "And now, it is my honor to reintroduce the system's original architect, our co-lead developer and strategic advisor, Mira Ellison." The silence in the room cracked into polite applause, then slowly grew louder as Mira approached the front of the stage. She could feel dozens of eyes on her. Some skeptical. Others intrigued. But no longer dismissive. She cleared her throat, her voice steady and calm. "Good morning. What you're about to witness isn't just another software platform, it's a living system. SentientGrid doesn't react. It anticipates. It doesn't just follow commands. It evaluates them. Most importantly," she paused, "it remembers." A few heads turned at that line. Mira didn't flinch. "Let's begin the demo." On cue, the system activated, simulating 5 crisis scenarios: a coordinated cyber attack on city water systems, a transit grid overload, a rogue AI attempting to alter traffic patterns, a multi-point energy drain during peak hours, and an internal breach of administrative commands. SentientGrid neutralized every scenario in real time. Not a single delay. Not a single error. The interface pulsed with elegant simplicity, showcasing anomaly detection, countermeasures, and predictive rerouting as if it were orchestrating a symphony. When the final scenario completed, the room erupted, not in polite applause this time, but in genuine excitement. Investors leaned forward. Analysts whispered about valuation spikes. Representatives from 3 international governments exchanged glances. Afterward, several approached Mira directly. "How scalable is it?" one asked. "Can it support decentralized overlays?" another inquired. Mira answered each question with the clarity of someone who had lived and breathed the system from day one. She didn't sell them a dream. She showed them reality, and it was impressive. Kalen watched from the side, his face carefully blank, though Mira didn't miss the flash of resentment behind his tight smile. The spotlight had shifted. Not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. Later that afternoon, Kalen summoned her to his office. "You made quite an impression," he said, not looking up from his desk. "I wasn't trying to impress," she replied evenly. "I was doing my job." He finally looked up. Some board members think you should have more say. Maybe an expanded role. She raised an eyebrow. And what do you think? I think you're dangerous, he said. But necessary. Mira smiled slightly. You should have realized that 8 years ago. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in the company began to shift. Not dramatically. Not openly. But Mira could sense it. Some whispered in corners, debating whether she had blackmailed her way back. Others avoided her entirely, afraid to get too close to someone who had brought the CEO to his knees. She didn't bother correcting them. Let them speculate. What mattered was that she now had full oversight of SentientGrid, access to every node, every backup, every behavioral scan. And more importantly, her position was no longer dependent on the goodwill of a boardroom. It was written into the code. One afternoon, as she sifted through security logs, she found something strange. A new access attempt, masked and encrypted, targeting a backup module of the SentientGrid's core AI schema. The request had originated from an internal admin account. Odd. She followed the digital trail through several dummy credentials and VPN masks until the pattern emerged. Always the same time, 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. Always the same files, predictive learning protocols. Always the same method, fragmented downloads, cloaked as audits. The access key belonged to the finance department. Mira's lips tightened. The patterns were subtle but consistent. Someone wasn't just curious, they were replicating. Not to sabotage the system. To steal it. Again. The more Mira dug into the unauthorized access logs, the clearer the pattern became, and the more disturbing. These weren't just casual data pings or misfired system crawls. They were deliberate, coordinated, and quietly aggressive. Someone inside Virelia Systems was using cloaked credentials to attempt slow, steady siphoning of SentientGrid's most sensitive modules, specifically, the ones tied to adaptive learning, neural memory, and behavioral autonomy. The heart of the system. She traced the unauthorized sessions through 4 layers of digital camouflage, finally landing on a masked admin node routed through a restricted finance server, an area only a few executives could reach. Mira pulled up the full access history and froze. The authentication token belonged to a sub-profile, Vellon. Rachel Vellon. Kalen's executive assistant. The same woman who had called Mira the night she was fired, sounding concerned, even sympathetic. The same woman who had brought her coffee that morning after Mira's return. Mira stared at the screen. Rage didn't rise immediately. Instead, it came in slow, calculated waves. She accessed the core network logs again, pulling down timestamps, download attempts, and routing pathways. 2 weeks of data. All activity happened between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. always from the same masked node, always aimed at the same partition. It was clever. But not clever enough. What disturbed Mira more was where the downloads were going. The files were being sent to a private server. At first, the IP looked innocuous, just another cloud-based endpoint. But when she cross-referenced the server's registration with external business registries, her stomach dropped. The server was tied to a small, newly formed holding company, Virelia Insight Ventures. She hadn't heard of it. No one had. But the legal filings were clear. The primary executive listed? Kalen Strathmore. Secondary partner? Rachel Vellon. Mira leaned back in her chair, pulse steady but thudding like a war drum. This wasn't a breach of protocol. This was theft, and not just of data. Of identity. Of creation. They were trying to clone her system, spin it off under a new brand, and cut her out again, this time silently, without confrontation. They thought if they moved slow enough, quietly enough, they could outmaneuver the safeguards. They forgot who built the safeguards. That night, Mira activated Phase 2 of her embedded protection protocol. It wasn't destructive, it was surgical. She injected a fragment of decoy code into the very modules that Rachel had been targeting. At a glance, it looked real, proper data tables, memory structures, even simulated behavioral trees. But the algorithms were scrambled. Any attempts to recompile them would produce nonsense, functionally plausible gibberish. To a thief, it would look like the crown jewels had finally been snatched. But in truth, they were now holding glittering shards of glass. And Mira was about to let them choke on it. The next morning, at 9:17 a.m., Kalen summoned her to his office. The message was abrupt. No subject line. No greeting. When she walked in, he was already pacing behind his desk, his face paler than she'd ever seen it. "We need to talk," he snapped. "Good morning to you too," Mira replied coolly, taking a seat uninvited. He turned the screen of his tablet toward her. The lines of code were chaotic, symbols out of order, parameters that made no sense, functions that looped into oblivion. "This was pulled from one of our off-site backups," he said, "and it's scrambled. It looks like someone tried to extract part of the neural core," Mira said evenly. "Without the proper protocol." "Are you saying this is you?" Kalen demanded. "I'm saying SentientGrid knows how to protect itself," she replied. "It responds to unauthorized replication attempts." His voice dropped to a growl. "Do you have any idea how much was promised to investors tied to that new module?" Mira tilted her head. "Funny. I don't remember that being part of the roadmap. Who signed off on that?" His silence was all the answer she needed. She leaned forward, placing a small folder on the table, printed access logs, server traces, and entity records. "I know about Virelia Insight Ventures," she said. "I know about the source code extractions. And I know exactly who's been behind it." His face twisted. "You don't have proof it was me." Miro tapped the folder. "Rachel's credentials were used. Transfers went to a domain registered in your name. It's all timestamped. And I've already submitted the full packet to the board." Kalen stood rigid, jaw clenched. "You don't get to win this." She stood too, eyes level. "I already did. You just haven't read the terms of your own defeat." 2 days later, the boardroom of Virelia Systems was filled to capacity for an emergency session. Mira arrived 5 minutes early. Kalen came 20 minutes late. Rachel didn't come at all. Each board member had a thick report packet in front of them, Mira's evidence laid out in precise, inarguable detail. IP logs, legal registrations, timeline analysis. She hadn't needed to exaggerate a thing. The truth was damning enough. Evelyn Sharp, the board chair, was the first to speak. "Do you deny any of this?" she asked Kalen directly. He glanced sideways, cleared his throat. Rachel acted alone. Mira opened her copy of the report and flipped to the registration page. "The holding company lists you as primary executive. You accepted fund transfers into its operating account. You presented clone projections to third-party advisors." Evelyn folded her hands. "Is SentientGrid compromised?" she asked Mira. "No," Mira said firmly. "The original is intact, and the clone instance has been neutralized. The security protocols functioned exactly as intended. No real data was lost. But the intent was clear." There was a long silence. Evelyn closed her folder. "I think it's time for a change." The vote was unanimous. Kalen was removed as CEO within the hour. Rachel was terminated immediately. The shadow company, Virelia Insight Ventures, was dissolved by court order. And Mira? Mira was named interim CTO and granted controlling oversight of SentientGrid, legally and operationally. But it wasn't the title that satisfied her. It was the silence that followed. The silence of finality. Of recognition. Of justice delivered not through vengeance, but through truth and preparation. In the days that followed, Mira moved through the halls of Virelia not as an employee, but as a guardian. She reviewed infrastructure. Rebuilt trust with the engineers who had once doubted her. Trained legal teams on how to spot unethical corporate maneuvers. And every time a new project was proposed, she reviewed its security as both an architect and a survivor. She didn't revel in Kalen's downfall. But she made damn sure the culture that enabled it was dismantled. One evening, alone in the executive observatory, she activated SentientGrid's interface. "Status report," she requested. The AI's voice, calm and human-like, responded. "System status, secure. Threats neutralized. Oversight active. Core integrity, 100%. Mira smiled faintly. It had taken years, betrayal, exile, and one hell of a fight. But she had done more than defend what she built. She had made it untouchable. 3 weeks after the boardroom upheaval, Mira Ellison stood on a stage flanked by 12 vertical holograms, each one displaying a different city system: public transit, emergency response, power grids, hospitals, water supply, data protection. Each was now connected to SentientGrid, fully operational, fully adaptive, and fully under her oversight. It was the official investor reveal day. A crowd of potential partners, industry leaders, and international tech envoys filled the sleek auditorium at Mira Systems' new AI campus. This time, there were no whispers about sabotage. No side glances suggesting scandal. Just eyes, watching Mira. Listening. Behind her, the grid responded to simulated threats in real time: power surges rerouted with zero blackout time, unauthorized data breaches quarantined before a single byte was compromised, even real-time adjustments to a hospital's patient load after a simulated emergency alert. Every response was seamless. Calculated. Human-adjacent, but faster and fairer. And at the heart of it was Mira. Not a ghost behind the code. Not a footnote on a patent. She was now the face of the future. As the final simulation concluded, Mira stepped forward. "What you've seen today is more than software," she said, voice steady. "It's a reflection of how we should build technology: transparent, resilient, and accountable. SentientGrid doesn't just defend against external threats, it recognizes internal ones. It protects not just infrastructure, but intention. It remembers who helped build it. And more importantly," she paused, scanning the crowd, "it knows who tried to steal it." That line earned more than a few raised eyebrows. But no one challenged her. They couldn't. Not anymore. The room erupted into applause. By afternoon, contracts began landing in Mira's system like rain on glass. One from a federal transport agency seeking a full grid rollout. Another from a European healthcare conglomerate whose data breaches had cost them millions the year before. Then a third, confidential but massive, from an international security coalition. In total, Mira secured 5 major partnerships in less than 48 hours. That evening, she returned to her office, now remodeled and relocated to the highest floor. From here, she could see the pulse of the city: trams gliding along magnetic rails, traffic flowing cleanly, towers humming with power redirected by her system. Her system. Not a version. Not a spin-off. The system. As she sat down to review reports, her smartwatch buzzed. A notification from SentientGrid. System status: stable. Threat level: low. Core integrity: 100%. She exhaled, letting the sound of silence ground her. But the true validation didn't come from applause or accolades. It came 2 days later, during a late afternoon when a knock echoed on her office door. Mira looked up. A young developer stood there, barely out of grad school, her Mira badge clipped awkwardly to a hoodie too big for her frame. "Come in," Mira said. The woman stepped inside, hesitant but determined. "I'm Mira. I was just assigned to the behavioral ethics team. I've been reading through your code. Not just the algorithms. The annotations. The logic trees. The embedded checks." Mira smiled faintly. "Good. Ethics should be the first thing a system learns." Mira hesitated, then asked, "How did you know? When to fight back? When to push? When to walk away?" Mira leaned back in her chair, considering the question. "I didn't always know. Sometimes, I pushed too soon. Sometimes I stayed too long. But when someone tried to take what I built, not because they understood it, but because they thought they could own it without earning it, that's when I knew." Mira nodded, filing the answer away with wide, thoughtful eyes. "Protect what you build," Mira added. "Whether it's code, or an idea, Or just your peace of mind? Not because someone might steal it, but because when they do, you'll be ready. Mariah left a few moments later. Mira sat quietly afterward, staring at her screen. The codebase of SentientGrid pulsed in soft blue, active but calm. Watching. Waiting. Weeks passed. Some old co-workers continued to keep their distance, unsure of which version of the story to believe. Others approached her cautiously, wanting to learn from her, or align with her. Mira didn't need their acceptance. What she had now was more valuable than approval. She had control. She had history. And she had security. One evening, she received an encrypted message from a well-known cybersecurity firm. The message didn't contain threats. It contained praise, and a request to license parts of SentientGrid's ethical response protocols for their internal systems. Mira reviewed the contract. It wasn't just financially lucrative, it was ideological validation. They finally understood, the best systems didn't just fight off attackers. They fought off betrayal. Months later, a global symposium on AI development invited Mira to be the keynote speaker. The theme? Protection through design, the future of AI ethics. She opened with a simple message. Trust isn't a checkbox, she said. It's a design principle. One that has to be coded in as deeply as your system's foundation. Because it's not if someone will try to take what you've built. It's when. And when they do, your work should speak for itself, loudly, clearly, and with receipts. The crowd applauded. Not out of politeness, but out of recognition. On the one-year anniversary of her reinstatement, Mira returned to the old development wing. She passed the now-framed schematic of SentientGrid, one she had drawn on a whiteboard years ago, long before it had a name. Long before she had power. Someone had scribbled a note in the corner. Built by Ellison. Guarded by Ellison. Mira smiled. In the end, she didn't burn down the company. She became its backbone. She didn't scream for recognition. She forced the world to listen by building something too vital to ignore. She didn't destroy her enemies. She let their own deception eat them alive. And in every line of code SentientGrid processed, in every algorithm it deployed, Mira Ellison had embedded one core logic, a truth that could never be rewritten. Trust must be earned. Loyalty cannot be faked. And integrity? Integrity protects itself.